And when you change your response, because human beings are predominantly meaning-making machines, so we look for meaning and add context to things that are or aren't there. And in effect, what we're really doing is just changing our perception. And if we can dial it a little bit one way and then dial a bit back the other way, it's finding the right frequency and going, that's an insight. And then we achieve growth.
So this was a snippet from today's chat with Tony Fahkry, who is a self-empowerment coach, mentor, author, speaker, and even a life and leadership coach. Now, Tony and I sat down and had this incredible chat about how we perceive a stressful time, situation, external stresses, negative situations, and what we can do to be able to mitigate the effects that has on us as a person. And I came out of this learning something seriously interesting. I'm going to leave it up to the end of the show for you guys to figure it out as well. But it definitely changed my perception on how to tackle stress, or even to how to handle a negative situation or see a negative situation. So guys, sit back, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Let Me Take a Selfie podcast, where we talk about how you can get the most out of your life through your self-care and well-being. And now for your host, Ben Rashley.
Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben.
Look, today I wanted to get you on the show just to have a chat on a subject that I tend to see a lot in personal life and in work life as well, and also around on sort of that social media aspect. And that is this sort of view that we have as society that we want to live a stress-free life, okay? And this utopian view of avoiding or having a stress-free life means that you have to avoid stressful situations. That means mitigating or getting rid of all stressful situations out of your life, which is, it's like the world's biggest fairy tale. It's sort of, it's this beautiful idyllic view, but it's never going to happen because there's so many different, points and factors and external factors that sort of get that going and can change what you plan. What I'd love to hear from you is probably a little bit more about that, and sort of about what you see, and sort of probably some better ideas on how we can have this, what we would say, a stress-free life.
Sure. Yeah, wonderful observation, Ben. And I guess the point and my observation and experience over the years, having worked particularly with corporate people, is that stress is unavoidable. And it's our reaction to the stress which is more important. And I'm reminded of a parable by the Buddha, in which he was speaking to his students, and he asked a student, does a person suffer if they're struck by an arrow? And the student replied, yes. And then he asked, what happens if they're struck by a second arrow? Do they suffer more? And the student said, yes. And then he went on to explain that life is really about the sense of our reaction to that second arrow. The first arrow represents the sense that stress and pain are unavoidable. They're part of life. We cannot avoid them. But it's the second layer, or that second arrow of judgment, which actually creates suffering. And then they went on, and there's that quote or that meme that gets shared around on the internet, and that is that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So I guess the point, and my observation and experience of coaching and writing about this topic, is that we cannot eliminate stress from our lives, but we can raise our threshold or our resiliency, our emotional, mental resiliency, in order to adapt to the situations. And if we look at some people such as Navy SEALs. They, in fact, go into stressful situations. They seek out stressful situations and they train themselves to deal and confront those stressful situations. And they have an axiom, and the axiom is calm is contagious. And so this is a topic that I've really loved and enjoyed, particularly prior COVID when I was working with corporate teams, and that is teaching the executive teams how to maintain a sense of calmness where it rubs off on one another, and interpreting the stimuli or the stressor. And as you and I spoke earlier about that sense of what else is taking place behind the scene that I'm unaware of, and then looking at our judgment, looking at our thoughts, investigating our emotions, and looking at what is taking place and what am I bringing to the table. So as the Buddha said, what are my judgments that are amplifying this situation further?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You're speaking about sort of how we suffer, which essentially, if our tolerance to stress is quite low, and it creates this sort of very negative view and situation for your own personal self, that is your reaction of that situation, and that it becomes this sort of dark, deep, negative sort of place. And look, I'm a movement sort of practitioner, so I look at a lot of things on a physical body sort of self. And you talking about creating resilience, and we've all know talking about mental resilience, talking about physical resilience. The funny thing is that creating your reaction around that is a part of resilience practice. And just like you would go to the gym and maybe lift weights, or go running and start to work towards maybe a marathon, you'd start slowly and you start to keep working into that. You're creating resilience for that stressor to be able to tolerate that stressor, right? And I'm guessing what you're saying as well is that doesn't change when you go down into the mental realm and being able to look at stressful situations.
Exactly. So it's really approaching stress, not running away from it, because when we run away from stress, we defer our ability to cope. And so what we're doing, in effect, is raising our threshold. And what we can do, Ben, is expose ourselves to stresses a little bit each time. So it might be, for example, being overwhelmed at work by emails, bosses' requests, coming home to a busy family life and children. And it's somehow finding within us the ability to cope with those situations, and not necessarily fixing things out there, because sometimes we cannot fix things out there, but we can change our perception as to what we perceive as a stressor. So we can change our response by changing the meaning that we assign it. So instead of looking at it as though, my boss is always giving me too much work that I can't handle, I love the opportunity that my boss believes in me, and I'm overwhelmed that they have the insight to believe that I can do this work. And when you change your response, because human beings are predominantly meaning-making machines, so we look for meaning and add context to things that are or aren't there. And in effect, what we're really doing is just changing our perception. And if we can dial it a little bit one way and then dial it a bit back the other way, it's finding the right frequency and going, that's an insight. And then we achieve growth from that. And that stressor no longer affects us.
Talking about, you spoke about sort of deferring our ability to cope, right? Going down that route a little bit, how can sort of avoiding or running away or from dealing with a situation like that, how can it impact us in the long run?
I guess when we're deferring dealing with stresses or toxic situations, toxic people, whatever it may be, in effect, we're just compounding the process. We're adding to layers of stress, which effectively follow us like the wake of a jet skier. And so in my work, I often advise people that even stresses, even unfortunate events, contain the seed of an opportunity. There is always something there within that situation or that experience that is calling forth your resiliency to come forward. And sometimes we don't know that we've got this courage, resiliency, untapped potential until a crisis ensues. So if we're constantly running away from it, Ben, we're actually deferring our personal growth. We're recoiling from life. We're cowering in resignation. And what we want to do is lean into our challenges. And that leaning in doesn't mean throwing ourselves into it, but just, it might be leaning in 5%. I like the idea. I was listening to a tape recently of a Buddhist practice where the person was talking about forgiveness, and he used the following words: to the extent that I am ready, I forgive you. And so the idea is that to the extent that I'm ready to confront this stressor or this challenge, I accept. So it's the idea of having a soft front, which what they call in Buddhism a soft front, and a hard back. So we soften into our chest, into our soul, but we keep a strong back, and we soften into our challenges. We lean into them instead of stressing and developing a hard front and a soft back, a spineless back. So it's that sense of leaning into our challenges. And in doing so, we develop courage. We develop self-belief, self-esteem, self-worth. Every time we lean into a challenge and overcome it, we develop self-confidence.
Yeah.
And that's the key. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And leaning in, like if we can go down that a little bit further, right? We talk about, we haven't spoken about it yet, but, I feel from what I can observe, and I'm no expert in any of this, but, I feel like us as the humankind, we love control. And so we like to control our situations, and we like to plan our situations, and we like to sort of map out what is life itself and sort of map this journey. And, so if that journey doesn't go to plan, that's no good. That's stressful. That's not what I wanted. That's not what I was intending. How can this be? And all that. And, leaning into it is almost accepting and relinquishing that control a little bit. And it was, I read a blog of yours. It's probably about a month or so old now. And it was, you quoted Charles Swindoll and spoke about saying life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And it's an incredible quote, and it is quite true. And it's quite true on you saying that you've got to sort of accept it, and you've got to accept forgiveness that that's not what you wanted. However, how can you sort of lean into it, as you said, and embrace that and move with it and sort of take that on and turn it? It's like, making lemons out of lemonade, so to speak, or lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that sense of uncertainty, which we've seen in the last 12 months with the pandemic. It uprooted thousands, millions of people's lives, and we never knew this was coming. And so I think this was a very big spiritual lesson for humanity, and that is life is about uncertainty. Nothing is assured. I've spoken and coached clients who have talked about getting up in the morning and, ready to seize the day, and, suddenly their loved one was taken from them in a tragic accident or an illness, and they never saw it coming. Life is uncertain. So, but we expect that things are going to be a certain way. We plan, we have goals, we set agendas, we make appointments, and that's all good and fine. But I think we've got to create some uncertainty in our life, the level of expectation, because from uncertainty, again, there's that seed of potential. And life is about uncertainty. And if we can allow 10, 15, 20% of uncertainty and factor that into our time and our days and our weeks, then some of the most unbelievable experiences can emerge from that. And it was testament this morning. I had to do a blood test this morning, and I was waiting in queue before the clinic opened. And there was a wonderful woman sitting down, and the complete stranger, we struck up a conversation. She was a school teacher. And for 15 minutes, we had the most wonderful chat just about life. And it never went down the pandemic or about fears. It was just about what she does, what I do, and this sort of mutual sharing of information. And then we went our separate ways. And that's uncertainty. But had I been rushing to get to the clinic and get out of there by a certain time to get back home and make all these scheduled appointments, I would have missed that opportunity to share an experience with a fellow human being.
And would you say that it's almost taking the blinkers off, would you say, in life?
Yeah, keep being open-minded, Ben. Just being open-minded, being open to opportunities and recognizing when those opportunities come your way.
Yeah, that's actually really insightful. And I think as a society, although we learnt to slow down a little bit through last year, I don't know about you, but the more I look around, I feel like that's quickly forgotten. And all of a sudden, learning how to just be open and observe your surroundings and see what the surroundings have in store for you, as opposed to, that I've got to get here and I've got to be there and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. How us as a society could really sort of deal with trying to probably keep it not pared back, but just a bit more, as you said, open-minded.
Yeah. It's. I think that's a really important point, and I always get back to two things when, on a personal level, but also professionally, and when working with clients, and that is, what do I value most? What gives me the most meaning? And what is my purpose? So I ask those three questions, and in everything I do, whether it be going for a walk or a run or going shopping, it always comes back to, what are my values? What is my purpose? What meaning do I derive? And I think when you follow something similar to that, and it doesn't have to be exactly that, then we find that we're not rushing about our days and we slow to the speed of life, because there is nowhere to get to. There's no finite place, because our lives are infinite. We're not running this rat race because we get to one destination and suddenly we're bored with that destination, and then we're longing for the next destination. So in some respects, we are like, mice in a lab experiment, just constantly spinning the wheels. But what's the purpose? What is the purpose? What is the meaning? What are my values? And if we abide by those three principles, we find that everything that we do, all our actions, become purposeful and then also become intentional. So we set an intent. I mean, I set intents every day. I get up and I set the intent to have a miraculous, wonderful, authentic, beautiful day every day, irrespective of what happens. And it's not being, blinded to the challenges that confront me, because it's my reality and that's what I'm choosing to create. That's my world. And so if we follow something similar, then we do have a lot of power, and we're not repeating the same day, the Groundhog Day.
Yeah. And I don't know if you are familiar with Marie Kondo. It's like Marie Kondoing for the mind, from how you're telling me about this. It's, does it spark you joy? What is your intent? If you don't need it, remove it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. There you go. Marie Kondo. So, and looking into that a little bit more, you sort of, you're looking at your intent and you're looking at all those sorts of bits and pieces. However, if you were to go to work, and we're talking about your life as a finite, thing, and you're trying to chase that, is it trying to chase that, pay increase, or that promotion, or that new job, or sort of getting that new house, or, upgrading and continuing to get there and get to that next part. And then, you grow stale of it and you want the next thing and you want the next thing. Putting someone in like a situation here and just saying like they've gone into work, and that there are that person, they are trying to chase, that job promotion, they are trying to chase maybe that partnership title or that role or whatever. And, they're in there and obviously their boss is just throwing things at them left, right and centre. And they get into that mindset, and they get into the mindset going, oh, this is too much. This is way too much. I don't want this, this boss has it in for me. They don't want me to succeed. This is completely unfair. I don't like this whatsoever. I am hard done by, and to pardon my French, this is bullshit. With someone like that, where would you go with that?
So I guess it really starts with purpose. And that is, I often start with clients and just talk to them about purpose. And it's not this sort of purpose of what is your life's purpose, but what is your purpose of getting a job raise? What is your purpose of becoming the partner in a company? What do you believe that achieving your goals are going to achieve? And see, Ben, ultimately our purpose is about fulfillment. It's about happiness. It's about, in some respects, it's about unfulfilled childhood needs. It might be they want to become a partner in the law firm because they want to be praised. They want a sense of achievement. Their mother or father never gave them the praise that they were seeking as young children. And so many of our desires and our wants always stem from unfulfilled inner needs. And so when we recognize that, and I often say when we take the journey into ourselves and recognize why we are doing what we do, then we can see that chasing after our goals really is a means to an end, insofar as a lot of the goals can be negative geared when we give ourselves permission by acknowledging our emotions. So it might be that wanting to be in a loving relationship and get married and have children is about safety, security, self-acceptance, self-worth. And so it's negatively gearing that and giving ourselves that already before we get the goal or attain the goal. So it's saying, I am enough. I am enough. And if I do achieve this goal, then wonderful. If I don't achieve it, I'm enough because I've fulfilled my inner needs without having to do that externally. So it's sort of recognizing I have all that I need to be happy right here, right now. And then when I do that, I become intentional about what I achieve, and that becomes complementary to who I am. It's not that I need that to make me who I am, because my experience tells me that with the hundreds of people I've worked with over the years, they believe that getting a title is going to make them happy or complement them. But what happens when that title is taken away? They feel a void, an emptiness, a sense of lack. Their self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence takes a beating. And so really they were building their foundation of self-worth on brittle ground. And so what I'm suggesting is that we give ourselves that sense of entitlement, that sense of self-worth first before chasing our goals.
So self-validation before external.
Exactly. Re-engineer the process inside out. Make it an inside-out job.
And so that person who we just sort of, just made up, if they were sort of self-validated themselves and actually went in there, and the same situation was happening with all that sort of workload and all that stuff getting put onto them, the person who did think they were enough and did think they were sort of worthy of that and were capable of it would look at it in a different situation going, well, my boss sees me as that I am capable of actually getting this over the line. I am able to get this done. Would that be correct?
stay in that job, but they have options at that respect, because they're no longer seeking validation externally. They're giving themselves that validation internally and constantly. And so life is really reflecting what we think about ourselves internally. There was a wonderful New Thought author back in the 50s called Neville Goddard who said that the world is ourselves pushed out. So whatever we're thinking is just being mirrored back to us at each opportunity. And it's really giving us the opportunity to look at what we're believing about the world out there. And so if we're having issues with our boss, it's about going back inside. What am I believing that's creating this situation outside? And again, re-engineering that process.
Yeah, so it could be used in a way of being able to tolerate what you need to do, or giving you the empowerment to make the decision that you know you're better than that and worth more than that, and moving on and finding a better journey.
Absolutely. It might be making a career shift. And again, I've worked with thousands of people. I mean, I had a situation with a guy I was working with who worked with one of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies in the US, and he was being undervalued in his position. He was a top senior in a top senior management position. And it just showed that he was just undervalued. And so he left the company and channeled his expertise into a completely different area. But it's having the power to recognize that and not believing that you are dictated by external factors.
And look, Tony, I've figured from the very short moment that I've met you and known you for that you're a person who loves a quote. You're a master of quotes, and and you pull out some real pearlers. And I was just literally before we came on to chat, I was reading your blog from earlier on in the week, and you were quoting a motivational speaker, Jim Rohn, who said, "The same wind blows on us all, the winds of disaster, opportunity and change. Therefore, it's not the blowing of the wind, but the setting of the sails that will determine our direction in life." And sort of everything you said there is quite true, isn't it? It's actually how you set your sails, where you set your sails is where your destination is going to go. It is the same wind, but it's where you take it. Are you going to up anchor? Are you going to keep anchor? North, south, who knows? But that's up to you, and that's your empowerment. And so going back to that resilience, they might be, winds of disaster, they might be heavy winds, but it's what do you do with that wind? How do you harness that wind, or how do you choose to succumb to that wind?
Yeah, indeed. And it's just looking at that sense that, we've all got our own challenges and difficulties in life. Some face more than others, and no one gets off scot-free. But it's to the extent that how we look at those challenges and whether we use them to our benefit. And regrettably, most people hit a crisis point or a breaking point before they make the change. And you've probably heard about so many people now giving up the rat race in the last 12 months during the pandemic, and they've moved into state or moved to regional areas and changed careers. So it took a crisis to do that. And what I'm suggesting is that we make those changes before a crisis develops by reorganizing our values, what is of importance to us. And then and that's not to say, Ben, that even when we do that, we're not going to face challenges, because we live in this, three-dimensional world. And no one gets off scot-free. I mean, we all know that. This isn't a utopian society, and I don't pretend that it is, nor do I make that evident in my writing or coaching. All I do is simply give people the awareness to look within themselves and harness the secret weapon or the potential and the wisdom that's already there. It just hasn't been mined. It hasn't been developed. They haven't dug for it just yet, because it exists. And I assure you, sometimes we find potential in the most extreme situations where we think we don't have what it takes, that's when we have what it takes, when we're pulled to our tether, and that we figure, wow, I never knew I had this courage to step forth and tell my boss, I don't like this job anymore and I deserve better.
And it gets back to that old saying, to make a diamond, you need pressure.
Yeah.
So something so beautiful can come out of, some of the, most sort of, traumatizing of situations or toughest of situations.
Indeed.
Now, talking about things like that, like, I've listened to you, for probably the last half hour or so to speak, and then I sort of internally listen to myself as I speak. It's quite interesting. It's like, I'll talk about a situation, I'll label it. I'll label it as stressful, negative, disastrous, traumatic, or whatever. However, you tend to not sidestep it, but you tend to sort of wash over the label of the situation. And you talk about it, and we still understand that it is this situation that is probably not ideal. However, you don't put this sort of big stick label on it and saying that is what it is, and this is, and that's how we look at it, right? So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about that, and sort of why do you yourself avoid sort of labeling a situation like that as opposed to labeling it, and what are the reactions out of that, and how does that change your mindset?
I guess wisdom and experience have taught me not to label situations, and I keep coming back to one individual that really shaped my journey, and that was a psychiatrist who's now passed, and it was the late Dr. David Hawkins, and he was a consciousness and a well revered psychiatrist, but he spoke about this sense of that, where the mind is notorious for adding labels and judgments to everything, and that nothing is necessarily good or bad, but it's that Shakespeare quote that thinking make it so. So it's the sense of holding back and waiting for things to develop, because there are always two sides to a situation. I think you and I touched on this in the sort of the preamble before we got on air, and that's that sense of, life is this stage, and what we're seeing is the actors on stage, but what we're not privy to is what's taking place behind the curtains. The directors, the cast, the crew working behind the scenes. And so I often ask myself, what could be taking place behind the scenes that I'm unaware of? And that gives me the sense that life is this sort of structure that's working constantly behind the scenes, and that we're not privy, or we're not seeing this information. But what we do see is the information or the experience that takes place before us. So it might be that one day we're going to work, we're doing 80 kilometres in a 60 zone, we get pulled over by a policeman, we get issued a ticket for $165, and we're annoyed with that. And rightfully so, you would be annoyed with that. But what I'm suggesting is that at the moment of its occurrence is a challenge. It's difficult to accept, but there could be other things taking place behind the scenes, such as perhaps you are being slowed down because of a further accident that may have occurred up the road. Perhaps you learn on the evening news that a person sped through a red light and killed 4 people, and had you not been stopped, you would have been one of them. And we hear about these stories all the time in 9/11. People that were supposed to be in the tower that day and called in sick or for whatever reason. And it's that sense of just asking ourselves constantly when bad things happen, what we call bad things, what is taking place behind the scenes that I'm unaware of? And if we keep asking that question and wait, then I think, like a jigsaw puzzle, Ben, the scene will come together in due course, and it might be days, weeks, hours, maybe months, and then we'll have an aha moment. That's why that had to happen as it did.
Yeah.
So it's suspending judgment.
It's sort of like this sort of sliding doors sort of moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. It's like because we're so quickly to react, and we're so quick to sort of put a label on and go, that's unfair, that's unjust, that's not right. How can this be happening, and all that sort of stuff. And then further on down the track, you look and go, oh well, that really worked out well. How come that? So, and probably the most traumatic part of that whole situation was my reaction to it, and me saying that that's not right, and how can this be happening? And then you come up on top. It's that bottle bobbling in the ocean. You come up on top at the end.
Exactly, it's that second arrow, isn't it? That the Buddha spoke of, that second arrow of judgment, and so it's really about just suspending judgment, and it takes effort because our initial reaction is one of negativity, and evolutionary psychologists talk about this sense of the mind has a negativity bias, and it's a mechanism that's wired into our brains. That's an evolutionary response, because back in the prehistoric era, when man was roaming around the savannah and he heard or she heard a bush rustling, that meant imminent danger. And so our neural network is pretty much the same. It hasn't changed over the last 10,000 years. So what we're doing is looking for meaning and context in situations that may or may not exist. And so it's really about just suspending judgment, waiting, and asking ourselves what else could be taking place behind the scenes that I'm unaware of.
Just quickly touching on what you just said then, and we are this sort of ancient network, and we are this ancient being. And we're nowhere near evolved in our own state as we have in sort of what we've created around us. And so you look at stress levels, and if you went back thousands of years ago and you saw a saber-toothed tiger, that would be quite stressful. You would run. Yeah, it's either fight or flight. However, you drive down the road now and you're running on empty in the gas tank, and you look at petrol prices and they've skyrocketed 40 cents per litre, and your body reacts the same way. Yet, however, it's only 40 cents a litre, it's not your life. But the body can't sort of quite, the stress reaction, the hormonal reaction that comes out of that is exactly the same. And so going back to you talking about building the resilience is where, it's only 40 cents a litre, or it's a saber-toothed tiger, is completely different. And for us to be able to create that resilience, to be able to sort of mitigate much more of sort of the reactions and the internal reactions that we have.
Indeed. And again, the psychologist will talk about catastrophizing, that the mind, because of its negativity bias, tends to catastrophize situations. And I recall in my seminars, I would often talk about and compare. For example, in seminars, I've often ask people, how many people had a stressful day, and almost 80% would raise their hand. And then they would talk about, going home, and then their child would drop a plate accidentally and it would break, and they would just, really erupt and get angry at the child. But what they were really doing is catastrophizing a situation and adding context and meaning to something that wasn't there. They were bringing home their biases, their anger. And so I often ask them, what happened if you went home and that child just learned they had a terminal illness? How would you then react? And they broke the plate because they had just learned of that terminal diagnosis. And so our minds, again, are meaning-making machines. We tend to catastrophize situations that may or may not be there. And we're also adding meaning to things because of its hierarchical structure. So it's recognizing, Ben, that the brain just wants to do that. It's the monkey mind, letting it do its thing and detach from the mind and say, right, I see you. I know what you're doing. I can see what you're doing here, and that's okay. I choose not to be a part of it. And then step out of that and recognize that its negativity bias is just what the brain is intended to do, much like your abdominal wall is there to brace your spine. Your transverse abdominis does the same thing to hold the pelvis in place and keep your spine erect and the torso intact. The brain is doing what it's meant to do. It's inherent biological function.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. And would you suggest that this would be a starting point on where listeners would probably you would suggest listeners looking into on how they can sort of change their reactions and view to stress, is sort of analysing that meaning and sort of what we're creating and labelling meaning to?
Absolutely. The first thing that I often do when I start working with a client is to get them to start keeping a journal and just observe what they're thinking about, their predominant themes. And then I look at the themes. And so it might be that a lot of their journaling is about rumination or overstimulation, or looking at thoughts that are recurring, looking for meaning, perfectionism. And when we have, a 14-day observation of what they're thinking, then the individual can look at that and step back and go, wow, I didn't realize that I'm spending 80% of my time stressing about things that inherently resolve themselves of their own accord. Because life just has a way of resolving itself if we leave it alone. I mean, you don't have to tell a cat to come in and drink milk or give it, a food to eat. It will know if you just leave it alone. It'll come in through the cat door. It'll sit down when it needs to. It'll purr when it needs to. It knows what it needs. You can leave a cat almost alone for 99% of the time. And because it knows, it's wired, it's genetically wired to know what to do. And I think that sometimes we doubt that life generally knows what it's doing. We've just got to have the faith to go along for the ride and take action when we need to, and not take action at times.
Yeah, and that journaling is it's a really strong thing to be doing. It's mental reps, as in, you do repetitions when you exercise to create that resilience and that sort of awareness and that body awareness. That journaling is taking mental repetitions to do the same. Mental awareness, mental repetitions to create mental resilience and strength.
Yeah, it's so true, Ben. And as testament to that, I mean, I still do it. I journal daily, but I also keep a habit tracker on my phone, because I know occasionally with respect to food, I'll tend to overindulge in certain food groups. And then it takes me down this rabbit hole of bloating and I feel unwell and not at my potential. So I'll start tracking what I'm doing. And when I do that, I can say, oh, hang on, for a 2-week period, I noted that I've been doing this on a regular basis at this time. What was going on? Oh, I was really stressed out at that point. What was I thinking? So I go back to my journal. And so really all it's about is self-inquiry. Was it Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth living? And it's that sense of, if we don't take the journey into ourselves and look at what we're thinking and feeling, then anything that passes by us is going to be a reaction instead of an interaction. So we want to interact with the world out there instead of react. And so what stress is really bypassing that self-inquiry and reacting to everything taking place. And again, neuroplasticity says that what nerves that fire together wire together. So we're just creating, and this is probably a good metaphor for your listeners, scoring a piece of wood. We're creating neural networks. If I got you to score a piece of wood once, it would hardly leave an indentation. But if I asked you to do that every day for 6 months, there would come a point where it would have a permanent indentation. And so in effect, we are scoring our mental model by repeating negative thought patterns and creating a model in the brain, a segment of the brain, synapses, neurons that are firing to create our reality. And so self-inquiring is stopping that and saying, right, I choose to see what I'm doing and change my response to it.
Wow. I just had a bit of a light bulb moment just as you were saying that. And it's, if I spoke to myself an hour and a half ago and going, hey, Ben, what was your intention with this this chat? And, what did you want to get out from Tony, and how are you going to sort of segue into this interview? And I would have spoken about, it's about our reaction to stress. And our reaction to those situations. However, I've just sat here and gone, it's actually not about our reaction at all. It's about our interaction in the situation, and then how does that change? So thank you.
Spot
That's
on.
amazing.
Spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. That's I have to thank you for that, because that's fantastic, and I hope everyone else that's listening gets that too, because it's what you've how you've explained it. It's actually about our interaction with the circumstance, as opposed to solely our reaction to it.
Indeed, and hence why we spoke about leaning in to our situations. Yeah, so developing a soft front and a hard back, leaning in. When we lean into our challenges, we develop the capacity to interact with what is taking place. When we come home and our partner, is upset, instead of saying, "Oh, you always react that way," we interact with them. What could be going on behind the scenes that I'm unaware of? Let's sit down. Everything else is unimportant, but you are important now. Tell me, how was your day? What's going on behind the scenes? Let's talk about it. So it's interacting instead of reacting. Oh, you always feel this way. You're always overreacting, So it's stopping our judgments and interacting with our environment.
Brilliant. Tony, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. That's incredible. Yeah, I think we're all better off from hearing this conversation. It's amazing. Thank you so much. Pleasure,
Ben.
Now, Tony, all our guests on the show, we have a series of questions, okay? And it's a series of questions that, for us as the listeners, can learn a little bit more about Tony, okay? And how Tony can, conducts his life a little bit as well, okay? So are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. What is your morning ritual?
So my morning ritual normally consists of getting up anywhere between 6:30 a.m. and about 7 a.m. I'll get up and do a little bit of movement, and that movement involves some stretching, some mobilization work, just to sort of get the body moving. I normally sit down and then go through probably about 20 or 30 minutes of just priming my mind, my subconscious mind for the day, just creating a ritual around what I intend to feed my mind. So much like training my body, I'll train my mind. And so I'll read passages, I'll read things that really invigorate me for the day. And just set me up as well. It might involve affirmations or just being intentional. What do I want to create for this day? And after I've done that, Ben, I'll get into exercise. So I try and exercise 5 days a week. Nowadays, it's generally either swimming or resistance training. And so either I get to the gym or the pool and do about an hour of exercise.
Yeah, brilliant. Fabulous. What would be your favourite health habit?
I guess it comes back to that, movement and exercise. I feel that as someone who's constantly in their head writing and being creative, that I'm constantly stuck up here. So movement and exercise is an opportunity to get out of my head and into my body. And it really gives me a sense of stillness and mindfulness and being present in the moment. And so I absolutely love, and it doesn't have to be just exercise. It could be movement. It could be going for a walk and doing, some sort of movement in the park, something that involves a movement sequence that gets me out of the house and out of my head and into my body.
Yeah, getting that body-mind connection back again. Yeah, incredible. Most valuable lesson learnt to date?
I guess my most valuable lesson is getting back to the theme of today's show, and that is nothing is what it seems, and that, always allow things to unfold before judging them. Had you asked me this question when I was in my 20s, it would have been, a totally different response. It would have been that things are either black or white. But wisdom and experience has taught me that there are always things taking place behind the scenes, which again, I'm unaware of. And to suspend my judgment and adding that second arrow of judgment to the situation.
What workplace or productivity tool could you not live without?
I guess it would be my computer, given with the pandemic that we've become so focused on working from home, just being in front of my screen and working with clients, coaching clients via Zoom these days. I have a lot of clients that I work with who are based overseas in the US, the UK, Canada. So it's really the computer which has become my lifeline in terms of interacting with the outside world. So I'd certainly feel a certain void if that was taken away from me.
Yeah, brilliant. Yep. I think it's definitely become a linchpin in most people's lives these days.
Indeed.
What is your life motto?
I guess my life's motto is the idea of living according to your true nature and just following what makes you come alive. I think it was Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, who said, follow your bliss and the universe will open doors for you where there were once walls. So it's that sense of tapping into your true nature, and that true nature is that sense of joy, happiness, bliss, love, potential, and recognizing who you are. Because when you follow that script, you feel good about every interaction, everything that you do. And so I find that embodying those virtues, embodying those values becomes an expression of who I am, much like a tree doesn't pretend to be a possum or it doesn't pretend to be a blade of grass. It is a tree, and it does that so well. It has one function, one role. And so, yeah, my life motto is be the best that I can be by embodying those virtues as well as I can.
Yeah, that's a fabulous one. You just do you.
Yeah.
So the final question that I have on the show is a bit of like the old school elevator pitch, right? Okay. And that is, if you had 20 seconds in an elevator just with one person and you had what we've spoken about today to pitch to them, how would you say it?
I guess I would say something along the lines of we have so much more power than we realize, and it's just a matter of activating that power.
Brilliant. Well, Tony, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show and just sharing the world of knowledge that you have around this. It's incredible. And I tell you what, I am gobsmacked about the amount of quotes that you can remember. It's amazing. I would love to know, and I'd love all the audiences to know, how can we find you as well? So if, because you do have a book, or you are an author, you're also a speaker as well, and a coach. So how can we find you if we wanted to be able to contact you or sort of have a look at all those sorts of things?
Sure. So, Ben, if your audience members want to get on my website, which is www.tonyfahkry.com, there is no AU on that, or they can Google me or look me up on Amazon, and I have 3 books published there. So, yeah.
Fabulous. And I'll make sure that they are all in the show notes like everyone else's is as well. So we'll make sure that all those correct links are in the show notes too, and even links to Amazon as well, and those books. Brilliant. So guys, if you've liked what you've heard on today's show, please make sure, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Also, there's going to be people out there that that this episode is going to relate to. So please, share it around. The more people that can listen to this and benefit from it, the better we are all off at life. So, yeah, make sure you share it around. And last but not least, don't forget to give yourself permission to go take a selfie.